Hey everybody, it's Zach, Tennis Pro Doc, helping you improve your game with science. And tonight, I've got the all-new Nike Air Max Volley, which is retailing right now for under $100, right at the $90 mark. But we're gonna find out tonight, can this shoe compete with Nike's more flagship models like the GP Turbo, Vapor 10, and Vapor Cage 4? Also, the new Vapor Next coming out earlier in 2021. So tonight we're gonna put these shoes through the suicide test, the new and improved serve test, the pivot test, infrared test, and of course, play test. Here we go. So when inspecting the Air Max Volleys, when I was looking at the uppers, my main focus was, how did Nike strip this shoe down to get it under $100? And right away you can tell on the lateral and medial sides of the upper, it's pretty much all mesh. So it's a pretty flimsy upper. Now you're not getting a lot of reinforcement either along the lateral side or the medial side. It's just this one strip of material and it's really not all that supportive. Now, if you look at the uppers of the shoe in general, it's this nylon-ish material. Now it is pretty comfortable, it breaks in pretty easy, but it's not plush like the Vapor 10s are or the GP Turbos are. Now what Nike did borrow from the GP Turbo line is this lace closure system. This really sucks right into the midsole of the shoe, gives you a really nice secure tie down on your midfoot. And for a more budget-friendly shoe, the tongues of the Air Max Volleys are actually pretty plush. Now another big hand-me-down from the GP Turbo line is this super high heel counter. Now as a foot doctor, I absolutely love these because you're not going to get the heel slippage you would in some other shoes with a lower heel counter. Now they went one step further in the Air Max Volley, where you actually have these two foam pods on the right and left side of your Achilles tendon, which actually sucks your heel in even more. Now where these really start to depart from the flagships is up in the toe box. Like I said before, this material isn't as plush as some of the more flagship shoes in Nike's line, and you're not getting as much toe box reinforcement as some other shoes on the flagship lines of Nike. So if you are a slider on a hard court or you're a toe dragger on serves, just be ready to burn through these faster than something like the Vapor Cage 4s. Now, like I said, the Air Max Volleys are pretty stripped down. However, they still weigh 14.3 ounces for a size 10.5 shoe. And all that weight is coming from, you guessed it, the midsole. And as you can see, it's more of a maximalist midsole, almost like you see on the Nike Vapor Flies. However, the midsole on these is not as forgiving and not as responsive as the Vapor Flies, obviously. And a lot of this midsole is actually just window dressing. The bottom of your foot is actually not contacting all of this. This is actually coming up over your arch to give you just a little more arch support. Now, following that midsole back into the heel, you will see these do have the posterior rocker, just like the GP Turbos, which does give you more efficient heel-to-toe movement. But obviously, as the name would suggest, the Air Max Volleys do not have a Zoom Air unit like the flagship Nikes do. They have the Visible Air or the Air Max unit in there, which also makes the midsole a lot bigger. And the biggest difference that you should be paying attention to between the Air Max Volleys and the flagships is in the lateral flange. It just does not have as wide and aggressive of a lateral flange as the flagship Nikes do, mainly the Vapor 10 and the Nike GP Turbos. So these shoes will do really well going heel to toe, up and down the court, but they will not be as stable moving side to side, east to west. Now moving down into the treads, it is a one-piece stamped wave pattern tread. Now the tread is actually a pretty cool design. However, it is pretty shallow, there's no pivot points, and there's no sliding channels. So these are not gonna be as stable as some other shoes which have deeper grooves, have sliding channels for a little better airflow, and pivot points that get you to be able to go from like a wide forehand back into the middle of the court. Now on a grittier hard court, it's not gonna make as much of a difference because these will grip the grit in the court. However, if you're playing on a slicker hard court, they're gonna start to slide, and I wouldn't even try to use these on clay. And I think the most interesting thing about these shoes is, if you look in the area where the shank should be, it is just one little piece of plastic. So it's darker plastic, it looks pretty cool, but I mean, as you can see, I'm just moving these shoes any which way I want. So there's not a lot of integrity there. Now the fit of the Air Max Volleys is kind of a conundrum. When I first put them on, they expanded really nice, they felt pretty good, and I didn't think I was gonna have much break-in in width. However, as I started playing in them more, I actually started getting a little bit more cramping on my left side especially. So if you are any bit of a wide foot, 2E or above, make sure you do go up a half size. The length is pretty true on these, so I think going up a half size would be a pretty good idea. I think you'll probably be able to break those in pretty easily because the uppers of them are pretty light, especially where the mesh is. But a word of caution, if you are someone that is prone to midfoot sprains or a Liz Frank injury, or ankle sprains, this is not gonna be the greatest shoe in the world for you. Also, if you're somebody with an incredibly flat foot that overpronates and maybe gets some tendinitis, also stay away from these shoes. They do have a big medial side of the midsole. However, with the upper being so flimsy, your foot's gonna pronate right through that. I don't even think an orthotic is gonna save you in these. So if you're any one of those categories, make sure you go for a different shoe. Now, the biggest thing I noticed about these shoes during the play test that was better than any shoe that I have tried this year, including some of my favorite shoes that I've tried, was that I didn't have any excess motion when I was playing. My foot stayed incredibly still, moving front to back. And that's because the insole of these is really nice and textured with this wave pattern. Now, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you put your foot in these shoes, they don't move. So when you're going to track down a ball, you get an incredibly good first push off because your foot is just not moving around in the shoe. It is staying glued to the insole. So even if you don't like these shoes in general, I would say if you can get your hands on the insoles from them, they can be a real game changer for you. Number one, they're gonna decrease friction, which means you're gonna sweat less, which means you're gonna heat the shoe up less. Number two, when you first go to move, the shoe's gonna move with you. Your sock is really gonna grip the shoe. So you're not gonna get that little stop, start, and then move. Next, if you find that your toes really jam in the toe box, they won't with these insoles. So now that I'm off my crazy foot doctor insole soapbox rant, I will say during the play test, I actually like the feel of the Max Air in there. I actually feel like I got a pretty good cushion. The one thing that I will say that I didn't like was when I had to push off from a wide forehand coming back into the court, the shoe in the midsole just doesn't really give you a lot of force coming back like say the GP Turbos do or the Solecourt Boost. You're just not getting that hard shank, or you're not getting that real responsive midsole foam to get you back into the court. And even though the shoes do have a great tie-down closure that really envelops your midfoot, I was always aware that I didn't have as much support on the medial and lateral side of the shoe. I was kind of always aware of that mesh lining on the medial and lateral side. So I wasn't really getting super aggressive with my movement running for balls. And I think I kind of noticed that in hitting some wide forehands, I was maybe just lunging a little bit too much. I wasn't taking that extra few steps because I was kind of afraid to. Once I found a good plant point, I just planted and hit, and the ball just went where it went. But I will say with serving and volleying, the high heel counter and the textured insole, I was able to get front to back pretty quick. And I was actually able to plant, split step, and hit a nice volley with these. So I will say, if you're more of a serve and volley or more of a doubles player, and you're just going up and down in the court, and you want a shoe that's pretty breezy, these actually might not be a bad pickup. And the other thing I will caution you about with these shoes during the play test is, once again, going back to the insole, it's really padded in the forefoot, which is great. However, once you start bottoming it out a little bit, remember the midsole on these shoes is kind of more that rock hard, a little more of the cheaper Nike foam. So once you bottom it out, you're gonna start to feel the ground a little more in the forefoot of these shoes. The heel was fine, but I did notice after about an hour and 10 minutes, the ball of my foot was starting to bottom out through this insert and into the midsole. And that's when I started thinking to myself, this is why these aren't as expensive as the Vapor 10s, the GP Turbos, or the Vapor Cages. No real surprise on the serve test, only getting 20 centimeters of serve height. The shank just isn't very strong and the midsole just isn't very resilient, so you're not gonna get that real good pop as some other shoes would. However, on the serve distance test, I actually got 78 centimeters of distance, which for me is actually pretty good. And I think it's just the aerodynamics of the shoe and all the weight being in the midsole. The shoe is actually able to cut through the air a little more and get a little bit more distance than it does height. I came in at 14.42 seconds on the suicide test, which was actually a lot faster than I thought I would be. Given that the shoes don't grip very well, you can actually see me sliding a little bit on some of these turns, and the flange isn't very wide. However, they are very aerodynamic, so I think that aerodynamic nature of the shoe helped it cut through the air a little faster, and that's what kept me under 15 seconds. Now, even though these shoes are all mesh, they still rose from 70 to 87 degrees indoors after only 45 minutes. And I think a lot of that has to do with the material around the toe box. Just not a lot of ventilation there, so you are trapping heat in the toe box, even if you do have mesh in the midfoot. And as you can see during the pivot test, I just wasn't as confident going out wide for forehands and then coming back into the middle of the court, whereas some shoes really can dig into the court, pivot, and able to move back toward the center with a lot of energy, like the Onyx Eclipse 3 or the Vapor 10s. These shoes, without that lateral flange and the unresponsive midsole, you're just not getting a ton of pivot and energy return getting back into the center of the court. So for me, if I'm looking to get a shoe for under $100, me personally, I'm probably gonna gravitate, if I'm going with Nike, to the Air Zoom Prestige or any other shoes, maybe the K-Swiss Ultra Shots or some of the Hyper Shots that are on sale right now, or even one of the New Balances like the 696. This shoe to me, the midsole just is a little bit thin in the forefoot and just not enough support in the uppers for me. However, like I said, if you're moving up and down more exclusively on the court, these actually might be a pretty good shoe to take a look at. Now remember, these are just the first of many brand new shoes that come out at the tail end of 2020 and the beginning of 2021. So I will say I do have a few other shoes sitting in my garage that I'm just not allowed to talk about yet, but those playtest and teardowns will be coming up very soon. So if you want to see those, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell. That way you do not miss those when they come out. Otherwise, hope you all have a great day, great night, wherever in the world you are tuning in from. I'll see you next time.